Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this because today we are looking at an event that literally shook the globe. We're going to unpack the 2024 Baltimore Bridge collapse. Now, when a multi-billion dollar disaster strikes, we usually go looking for these massive, catastrophic causes, right? But what if I told you that this entire international crisis, the destruction of critical infrastructure, and the severing of a global supply chain literally all began with a single tiny wire? So here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with the anatomy of the collapse. Then we'll zoom out to the economic shockwave. After that, we'll look at the legal reckoning, the rebuilding effort, and finally, how the port managed to bounce back.
All right, Section 1, Anatomy of the Collapse, a micro-level failure.
Let's step aboard the container ship Dali on the early morning of March 26, 2024. The timeline of what happened here is terrifyingly rapid. At 1:29 a.m., this massive, 984-foot-long ship experiences its initial blackout. It totally loses electrical power, propulsion, and steering. Just about a minute later, the pilot desperately calls shoreside dispatch to close the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And thank goodness for the incredibly quick actions of the Maryland Transportation Authority police, who were already out there for a maintenance project, because they managed to clear the traffic just 48 seconds before impact. Just 48 seconds. Then, time zero hits, and the vessel strikes Pier 17, causing a catastrophic collapse.
So what actually caused that initial blackout? Well, the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation revealed what is basically a shocking mechanical cascade. It's like a giant, tragic puzzle. Step 1. It all started with this tiny silicone label band on wire 1 inside the main switchboard. This little band was covering a blue insulated collar, which essentially prevented the wire from being fully inserted. Step 2. Because of that poor fit, the wire electrically disconnected, and that forced a high-voltage breaker to open, causing a low-voltage blackout. Step 3. This completely killed the power to the main engine cooling water pump. That shut down the main engine and severely reduced their ability to steer. And finally, Step 4. A flushing pump that was being used to supply fuel failed to restart, which triggered a second devastating blackout. And the NTSB found that these compounding safety concerns really only made matters worse. For instance, those high-voltage breakers we just mentioned, they were actually set to manual instead of automatic. If they had been in automatic mode, power could have potentially been restored in 10 seconds. But because they were in manual, it took 58 seconds. And when you're drifting toward a bridge, that is absolutely crucial time lost. On top of that, they were using a flushing pump, which is designed for maintenance as a main fuel pump with zero backup redundancy. The main engine was also configured to just completely shut down on low cooling pressure. And to make matters worse, the emergency generator took a sluggish 70 seconds to kick on because of an issue with the damper switch. It was really just a whole chain of vulnerabilities. Moving on to Section 2, the economic shockwave, the expanding blast radius.
When that bridge fell, the impact obviously didn't stop at the water's edge. The true scale of the chaos really splits immediately into human impacts, which includes the tragic loss of 6 lives and countless livelihoods, and massive economic impacts. You can see how the economic side fractures out even further into the bridge reconstruction itself, sweeping market value decreases and huge port impacts, like having to reroute commerce and dealing with frozen cargo shipments. It's an incredibly complex web of disruption.
So the absolutely crucial point here is the financial hemorrhage. While the Port of Baltimore was restricted for shipping for 76 days, the estimated economic loss to the city and its surrounding network was a staggering $15 million. And that's every single day.
Let's look at the specific commodities that were bottlenecked by this. We aren't just talking about abstract crates, we're talking about the salt used in diversified metals and mining. We're talking about gypsum and lumber, literally halting construction projects. Bituminous coal for fuels, coffee and sugar for agriculture, and massive, widespread disruptions to vehicle manufacturing. This bridge collapse severed a vital artery for incredibly diverse industries across the entire nation.
That brings us to Section 3, the legal reckoning, accountability, and settlements. With billions of dollars lost and lives tragically cut short, the legal fallout was immediate, and as you might expect, highly complex. We're looking directly at the actions of the Department of Justice here, who unsealed an indictment charging the operators of the Dali. The EPA assistant administrator summarized the government's stance with a pretty stark quote, stating that the indictment alleges reckless cost-cutting by dishonest foreign corporations resulted in death, disruption of our economy, and the discharge of oil and other chemicals. The DOJ actually charged Synergy Marine, Synergy Maritime, and their technical superintendent with conspiracy, ignoring safety protocols, and obstruction.
Now, there is a monumental contrast in the numbers being argued in court right now. Shortly after the tragedy, the vessel's operators filed a legal action attempting to limit their liability to roughly $43.7 million. But on the other side, the DOJ and economic analysts estimate the total economic loss of the disaster to be upwards of $5 billion. So we are looking at a truly massive legal gulf here.
However, there has been some swift initial resolution regarding the immediate cleanup effort. The U.S. government secured a civil settlement of nearly $102 million from the ship's owner and operator. But it's really important to note, this doesn't even touch the actual bridge replacement. That $101.9 million was solely to cover the federal costs of responding to the disaster and clearing out the 50,000 tons of steel and concrete from the Fort McHenry Channel. All right, Section 4, Rebuilding with Resilience, a $5.2 billion effort. So how exactly do you replace such an iconic structure while making sure you safeguard the future? Well, the Maryland Transportation Authority released updated estimates, and the costs have definitely surged, now setting between $4.3 and $5.2 billion, with an anticipated completion in late 2030. And why the big jump in cost? Well, beyond nationwide inflation on materials, it's all about redesigning for resilience. The main span is being increased to 1,665 feet, with a 230-foot vertical clearance to accommodate today's massive marine traffic. And perhaps most importantly, to prevent a strike from ever happening again, they are installing new protective pier fenders that are literally larger than a football field. The rebuild also involves some really fascinating environmental technology. To protect the Patapsco River ecosystem during construction, they're using things like swamp buggies to explore wetlands without sinking into the mud. They are also deploying what are called bubble curtains during the pile driving process. Basically, by pumping compressed air through these perforated rings, they generate millions of bubbles that literally dampen the underwater noise to protect the local fish and aquatic life. It's a really clever solution. The state is also pushing their environmental stewardship way beyond standard compliance. They've partnered with local nonprofits to build a 3-acre oyster reef in the Fort Carroll Sanctuary, and they're even repurposing safe concrete from the demolition to do it. They're hiring local watermen to remove derelict crab pots that trap marine life. And crucially, under the American Relief Act, 100% of this emergency relief funding is federal, which ensures the whole project can move forward rapidly without stalling. Finally, Section 5. The port bounces back, a surprising recovery.
Now, this is the twist in our story that really highlights human ingenuity. Despite having its main channel totally blocked by wreckage for months, over 55% of the year's cargo was fiercely handled in the second half of the year once that channel was cleared. The result? No way you would guess this, but the Port of Baltimore actually achieved its second-best year in history for total cargo, handling 45.9 million tons, valued at a massive $62.2 billion.
Yeah, the port's dominance completely remained intact. Even in the year of an unprecedented bridge collapse, Baltimore remained #1 in the entire nation for roll-on/roll-off farm and construction machinery. They also held on to the #2 spot for cars and light trucks, and somehow even secured a brand new 5-year contract with Carnival Cruise Line. The port didn't just survive this disaster, they adapted and delivered.
Which brings us to our final thought today. We started this whole thing with a tiny wire that took down a massive bridge, choked a supply chain, and sparked a $5 billion legal and construction saga. So the really crucial point is this. With replacement costs for single points of failure like the Key Bridge soaring past $4.3 billion, how do we balance the ever-growing demands of massive global shipping with the stark vulnerability of our critical infrastructure? It's a question that every major port city on Earth needs to be asking right now. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it gave you a crystal clear picture of this entire ripple effect. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.